The day my mother-in-law came to visit wasn't supposed to be any different from her previous visits. Tense, uncomfortable, but manageable. I had been married to her son Michael for 7 years, and in all that time, Barbara had never fully accepted me. But for Michael's sake, and especially for our 6-year-old son Ethan, I tried to maintain a cordial relationship. I was born with a mild form of cerebral palsy that affects my right side. I've never let it define me, but it does give me a distinctive gait, one that I've learned to live with proudly. Before meeting Michael, I'd faced my share of stares and whispers, but nothing could have prepared me for Barbara's subtle yet persistent disapproval. "Caroline, dear," she would say with that saccharine smile, "don't you think you should use a cane? It would make things easier for everyone." By everyone, she meant herself. The embarrassment of having a daughter-in-law who didn't fit her perfect family image was something she could barely disguise. That Sunday, Barbara arrived just as we were finishing lunch. Michael had to rush to the hospital for an emergency surgery. He's a trauma surgeon, something Barbara never failed to mention at every social gathering. "My son saves lives," she would beam, before adding, "and Caroline here does her little online job." My little online job was running a successful physical therapy blog for people with mobility issues, something I was proud of, but Barbara dismissed. As Michael kissed me goodbye, he whispered, "I'm sorry to leave you alone with her. I'll be back as soon as I can." I nodded, squeezing his hand. "We'll be fine. Ethan and I have plans to bake cookies anyway." Barbara made herself comfortable in our living room, commenting on every change since her last visit. "You moved the sofa. Interesting choice. The old arrangement was so much more elegant." I smiled tightly. "Would you like some tea, Barbara?" "That would be lovely, dear." Her gaze followed me as I walked to the kitchen, and I could feel her eyes on my uneven gait. Ethan was already in the kitchen, arranging cookie cutters on the counter. His face lit up when he saw me. "Can Grandma help us make cookies too, Mom?" "Of course, sweetie. Why don't you go ask her?" Ethan scampered off while I prepared the tea. I heard his excited voice, then Barbara's practiced laugh. "Cookie baking? Well, I suppose I could watch for a bit." By the time I returned with her tea, Barbara had positioned herself at our kitchen island, purse still firmly clutched under her arm, as if afraid to fully commit to staying. "Here you go," I said, placing the cup before her. "Thank you, dear." She took a sip. "Still using those old teacups, I see. The ones I sent for Christmas 2 years ago are much nicer." I bit back a response. The cups she'd sent were ornate, impractical things with tiny handles I couldn't grip easily. Michael had understood immediately why they remained unused. Ethan, oblivious to the tension, was happily measuring flour. "Mom, can I crack the eggs?" "Sure, buddy, just be careful." As I moved around the kitchen gathering ingredients, I could feel Barbara's critical gaze. When I reached for the vanilla extract on a higher shelf, my right leg trembled slightly, a common occurrence when I stretched. "Oh, Caroline," Barbara sighed loudly. "Wouldn't it be easier if you just asked for help, or kept things at a more appropriate height for your condition?" "I managed just fine, thank you," I replied evenly, successfully retrieving the vanilla. "Mom doesn't need help," Ethan declared proudly. "She's super strong." Barbara smiled thinly at him. "Of course she is, dear, but everyone needs help sometimes." The cookie preparation continued, with Barbara offering helpful suggestions at every turn. When it came time to roll out the dough, I took over from Ethan to show him the right thickness. As I moved around the island, my hip bumped the counter slightly, causing me to adjust my stance. That's when I heard it. Barbara's quiet snicker. "Something funny?" I asked, looking up. "Oh, nothing, she said, waving her hand dismissively. But then she leaned toward Ethan and said in a stage whisper, Your mother walks just like my childhood penguin toy. Wobble, wobble. She demonstrated with her hand, making an exaggerated waddling motion. The kitchen fell silent. I stood frozen, rolling pin in hand, the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up my neck. In 7 years, Barbara had made countless passive-aggressive comments, but never had she so blatantly mocked my disability, and never in front of Ethan. I saw my son's expression change from confusion to understanding. His small brow furrowed, and his lips pressed together in a way that reminded me so much of Michael when he was upset. "Ethan, why don't you—" I began, ready to suggest he go play in his room while I dealt with Barbara, but before I could finish, Ethan slid off his stool. He stood up straight, all 3.5 feet of him, and looked his grandmother directly in the eye. "My mom doesn't wobble," Ethan said, his voice clear and unwavering. "She walks like a hero." Barbara's smile faltered. "What did you say, dear?" "Mom says heroes aren't people who never fall down. Heroes are people who keep getting back up. Mom gets up every single day." I felt my throat tighten as Ethan continued, his young voice filled with a wisdom far beyond his years. "At school, Tommy said my mom walks funny, and I was mad. But then Mom came to career day and showed everyone how she helps people who can't walk could learn to be strong again. After that, Tommy said, my mom was the coolest, because she is." Ethan stepped closer to Barbara, his little shoulders squared. "Dad says Mom does more before breakfast than most people do all day, and she never, ever makes fun of anybody." Barbara's face had drained of color. The teacup in her hand trembled slightly. "Grandma," Ethan said, his voice softer now, "did you know Mum carries me upstairs when I'm tired, even though her leg hurts? Did you know she teaches people on her computer how to be brave? Did you know she volunteers at the hospital and helps kids like me, but kids who can't walk at all?" Tears were forming in Barbara's eyes now, her carefully applied mascara beginning to smudge. "My teacher says we should never laugh at what makes someone different because that's what makes them special," Ethan concluded. "I think Mom's walk makes her special. I think it makes her beautiful." The silence that followed was profound. I stood rooted to the spot, flower-covered hands forgotten, as tears streamed down my face. My beautiful boy, my defender. Barbara set down her teacup with a clatter. "Ethan, she began, but her voice broke. Tears were flowing freely now, carving channels through her foundation. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, looking not at Ethan, but at me. I moved toward my son, placing my hands on his shoulders. "Thank you, buddy," I said softly. Barbara dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Caroline, I don't know what to say. I've been terrible." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You have." She flinched at my honesty but nodded. "I deserved that." "No one deserves to be hurt, Barbara." "That's something I teach Ethan every day." Barbara looked at her grandson with new eyes. "He's extraordinary." "Yes, he is." Ethan, sensing the tension had shifted, tugged at my apron. "Can we still make cookies, Mom?" I smiled down at him. "Absolutely." Can I still help?" Barbara asked hesitantly. I looked at her tear-stained face, at the genuine remorse in her eyes, and made a decision. "Ethan, why don't you show Grandma how to use the star cookie cutter? It's a little tricky." As Ethan eagerly explained his cookie-cutting technique to Barbara, I stepped back and watched. My phone buzzed, a text from Michael. "Emergency, almost handled. How are things going?" I typed back, "Your son just taught your mother the most important lesson of her life. I'll explain later. We're making cookies. Take your time." When I looked up, Barbara was carefully cutting a star-shaped cookie under Ethan's supervision. She caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." And for the first time since I'd known her, I believed she meant it. The cookies went into the oven, filling the kitchen with the warm scent of vanilla and cinnamon. As we waited, Barbara cleared her throat. "Caroline, I need to tell you something. When Michael first told me about you, I was concerned, not because of your disability, but because of my son's history. He'd always been drawn to people who needed saving. I thought you were another project for him. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I was wrong, so wrong. Michael doesn't save me, Barbara. We save each other, every day. She nodded, fresh tears welling. I see that now, and I see what an incredible mother you are. She glanced at Ethan, who was peeking through the oven window, counting the cookies. He's proof of that. When Michael returned 2 hours later, he found the three of us in the living room, a plate of slightly misshapen but delicious cookies between us. Barbara was listening intently as Ethan showed her my blog, explaining proudly how many followers Mums Helping People had. Michael raised an eyebrow at me in question. We had a breakthrough, I said simply. That night, after Barbara had gone to her hotel and Ethan was tucked in bed, I told Michael everything. He was furious at his mother, proud of our son, and concerned about me. Are you really okay? He asked, holding me close. I'm better than okay, I replied truthfully. Today I saw our son become the man we're raising him to be, and I saw your mother begin to change. Michael kissed the top of my head. You're remarkable, you know that? I smiled. Actually, I do. Our son tells me every day. The morning after our cookie-baking confrontation, I woke early, my mind still processing everything that had happened. Michael had already left for his morning rounds at the hospital, leaving a note on his pillow. You and Ethan amaze me every day. Love you both. I smiled, tucking the note into my bedside drawer, along with all the others he'd written over the years. These little paper reminders had sustained me through many difficult moments, especially in the early days of dealing with Barbara. I made my way downstairs to prepare breakfast before Ethan woke up. To my surprise, I found Barbara sitting at our kitchen counter, 2 cups of coffee steaming in front of her. I hope you don't mind, she said nervously. Michael gave me the spare key ages ago for emergencies. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure of how to proceed after yesterday's emotional exchange. I couldn't sleep, Barbara continued, pushing one of the mugs toward me. I kept thinking about what Ethan said, and about how I've treated you all these years. I accepted the coffee and sat across from her. Barbara, Please, she interrupted gently. Let me say this while I still have the courage. I nodded, taking a sip of the perfectly prepared coffee. She'd remembered how I liked it. When Michael first told me about you, I was concerned, Barbara began. Not just because of what I said yesterday about him saving people. The truth is, I was worried about how other people would see him, see us, with you as part of our family. My grip tightened around the mug, but I remained silent. I come from a generation and a social circle where appearances meant everything, she continued. My friends' children were marrying doctors, lawyers, people with prestigious backgrounds, and I was proud when people envied me for having such a successful, handsome son. She looked down at her hands. When he chose you, someone with a visible disability, my first thought wasn't about his happiness. It was about what my friends would say behind my back. Her voice cracked. I'm so ashamed of that now. You're not the first person to judge me based on how I walk, I said evenly. But I should have been the last, Barbara replied, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. I'm your family. I should have been your fiercest defender, not your critic. The honesty in her voice was disarming. For 7 years, I'd seen Barbara as an adversary to be managed, not a person with her own insecurities. Do you know what Michael said to me when I expressed my concerns about your relationship? She asked. I shook my head. He said, Mom, Caroline doesn't need my strength. She's shown me what real strength is. She's the strongest person I've ever met. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Barbara's gaze was direct now. Yesterday, watching you with Ethan, seeing how you've raised him to be so compassionate and brave, I finally understood. I swallowed hard against the emotion rising in my throat. I don't expect forgiveness, Barbara continued. I just want you to know that I see you now, really see you, and I'm in awe of the woman my son married. Before I could respond, the patter of small feet announced Ethan's arrival. He appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, then brightened when he saw his grandmother. "Grandma, you're still here. Are we making more cookies today?" Barbara laughed, wiping away tears. "Not for breakfast, I think, but maybe later." She looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. "Maybe after the park." "The park?" Ethan's eyes widened. "Can Grandma come too?" Barbara and I exchanged a glance. "If she'd like to," I said. "I'd love nothing more," Barbara replied softly. After breakfast, the three of us headed to Riverside Park, a place I'd carefully selected years ago because of its accessible pathways. As we walked, Ethan skipped ahead, occasionally running back to share treasures. A particularly smooth stone, an unusually shaped leaf. Barbara matched her pace to mine, something she'd never done before. Usually she walked ahead with Michael, leaving me to catch up. The consideration wasn't lost on me. "He's so observant," Barbara commented, as Ethan examined a line of ants crossing the path. "He gets that from Michael," I said. "They both notice details most people miss." Barbara smiled. "I think he gets it from both of you. The way you navigate the world, you don't miss much." Dirt. We reached the playground and Ethan raced toward the swings. "Mom, push me!" As I helped Ethan onto the swing, I noticed a group of mothers on a nearby bench watching us. One leaned over to whisper to another, their eyes on my distinctive gait. It was a familiar scenario, one I'd learned to ignore, but today something different happened. Barbara noticed too. "Would you ladies like a photograph?" she called out loudly. "It might last longer than staring." The women startled, immediately looking away in embarrassment. Barbara turned to me. "I'm sorry, was that inappropriate? I just couldn't stand the way they were looking at you." I laughed, genuinely surprised by her defense. "No, it was actually perfect." As I pushed Ethan on the swing, Barbara stood beside me. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about your blog." "Oh?" I continued pushing, unsure where this was going. "I have a friend, Judith Winters. She runs a foundation for families affected by childhood disabilities. Would you be interested in speaking at one of their events? Your perspective as both a physical therapist and someone with personal experience would be invaluable." I nearly missed the next push, causing Ethan to squeal in delight at the momentary free fall. "You know about my professional background?" I asked, surprised. In all our conversations, Barbara had never acknowledged my career beyond dismissing it as my little online job. "I did some research last night," she admitted. "I read your entire blog, your article about parenting with a disability. It opened my eyes to challenges I'd never considered." I was speechless. For years, I'd longed for Barbara to see me as more than Michael's imperfect choice, to recognize my professional accomplishments and the value I brought to our family beyond being a wife and mother. "I'd be very interested," I finally managed. "Wonderful. I'll call Judith this afternoon." Ethan jumped off the swing, landing with a triumphant "Ta-da!" before running toward the climbing structure. Barbara and I sat on a bench to watch him. "He has so much confidence," she observed. "We've worked hard on that," I said. "Michael and I want him to grow up believing in himself, regardless of what others might think." "Like you did," Barbara said softly. I turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" "The confidence you have. It's remarkable. All these years, despite how I treated you, you never once apologized for who you are or tried to change to please me." I learned a long time ago that I can't control how others see me, I replied. The only thing I can control is how I see myself. Barbara was quiet for a moment, watching Ethan conquer the climbing wall with determined focus. When my husband, Michael's father, was alive, he used to say that character reveals itself in how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Her voice wavered. By that measure, I've revealed a terrible character these past 7 years. We all have blind spots, Barbara, I said, surprising myself with the compassion I felt. The important thing is what we do once we see them. Can I ask you something personal? She asked hesitantly. I nodded. How did you become so resilient? I would have given up on me years ago. I considered her question carefully. When you grow up with a disability, you develop a thick skin out of necessity, but you also learn to recognize the difference between people who are malicious and people who are just uncomfortable or uninformed. No, and which was I? Barbara asked, her voice barely audible. I always believed you were the latter, I answered honestly. That's why I never gave up on the possibility that someday you might see beyond my disability. Tears filled Barbara's eyes again. Thank you for that faith, even if it was undeserved. Our conversation was interrupted by Ethan running up, flushed with excitement. Mom, Grandma, there's a dog show over there. Can we go see? We followed him to a small gathering where a local shelter was hosting an adoption event. Ethan immediately fell in love with a 3-legged retriever mix named Charlie. Look, Mom, he walks different too, just like you, Ethan exclaimed, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. In the past, such a public announcement of my disability would have made Barbara visibly uncomfortable. Today, she knelt beside Ethan and said, You're right, sweetheart, and he's just as special as your mom. The shelter volunteer approached us with a smile. Charlie was hit by a car last year. We weren't sure he'd make it, but he's the most determined dog I've ever met. Can we adopt him, Mom? Please, Ethan begged, his eyes wide. Oh, sweetie, that's a big decision we'd need to discuss with Dad, I explained gently. Actually, Barbara interjected, I was thinking of getting a companion. My house is so empty since your grandfather passed. The volunteer brightened. We do have a senior dog program. Would you like to meet some of our older residents? As Barbara was introduced to a gentle, grey-muzzled Labrador named Duke, I watched her interact with the dog with surprising tenderness. This was a side of Barbara I'd never seen. Vulnerable, open, genuinely connecting with another living being without concern for appearances. By afternoon, Barbara had completed the adoption paperwork for Duke, and we were heading back to our house with plans for an early dinner before Michael returned from his shift. I never thought I'd be a dog person, Barbara admitted as we walked. Richard, Michael's father, was allergic, so we never had pets. Duke seems perfect for you, I said. Calm, dignified, but still playful. The volunteer said he might help me meet people in the neighborhood, Barbara added. I've been rather isolated since Richard died. I suddenly realized how little I knew about Barbara's daily life. In our focus on managing her visits and navigating her criticism, I'd never considered that she might be lonely. You're welcome to video call with Ethan more often, I offered. He'd love to see Duke regularly. I'd like that very much, Barbara said, her voice thick with emotion. Back at home, we prepared dinner together, a first in 7 years of family gatherings. Usually Barbara would sit at the counter offering commentary while I cooked, or she would take over completely, subtly implying my methods were insufficient. Today, we worked side by side, Barbara following my lead as I showed her how we made Michael's favorite lasagna. You've created such a warm home, Barbara observed as she chopped vegetables. I can see why Michael loves being here. We both work at it, I replied. A home is only as warm as the relationships inside it. Barbara nodded thoughtfully. I wish I'd understood that sooner. After Richard died, our house became just a showcase. Perfect, but empty. "It's never too late to change that," I said gently. When Michael arrived home, he stopped short in the doorway, taking in the unexpected scene of his mother and wife cooking together, laughing as Ethan supervised their efforts with comic seriousness. "Did I walk into the wrong house?" he joked, though I could see the question in his eyes. "Dad, Grandma's getting a dog named Duke, and we saw another dog with 3 legs like Mom's walk, and we made cookies, and now lasagna." Ethan rushed to his father, delivering his news in one excited breath. Michael raised an eyebrow at me over Ethan's head. I gave him a small nod and a smile that said, "It's all good." During dinner, Barbara raised the subject of the Disability Foundation. "Caroline has agreed to speak at Judith's next event. I thought perhaps you might attend too, Michael, to discuss your work with trauma patients." Michael nearly choked on his wine. "You want us to speak together?" "Well, yes," Barbara said, as if it were the most natural suggestion in the world. "Your perspectives complement each other beautifully. Caroline understands the patient's journey, and you understand the medical intervention." I watched my husband process this dramatic shift in his mother's attitude. "I'd be honored to speak alongside Caroline," he said finally, reaching for my hand under the table and squeezing it. After dinner, as Michael gave Ethan his bath, Barbara helped me clear the table. "I should head back to my hotel soon," she said. "But before I go, I wanted to give you something." She retrieved her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," she explained, opening it to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. "She gave it to me when Ethan was born, but I couldn't bring myself to pass it on then. I'd like you to have it now." I took the box, deeply moved by the gesture. "Barbara, are you sure?" "More than sure," she replied firmly. "You are my family, Caroline. It's long past time I acknowledged that properly." As we heard Michael and Ethan coming down the stairs, Barbara added quickly, "I know one conversation and one weekend can't erase 7 years, but I hope it can be a beginning." I fastened the bracelet around my wrist. I'd like that very much. When Michael and Barbara left to walk Duke at her hotel before bedtime, Ethan climbed onto my lap on the sofa. "Mom, did I do good yesterday with what I said to Grandma?" I hugged him close. "You did more than good, buddy. You taught Grandma something very important." "What?" "That true strength isn't about how fast you can run or how straight you can walk. It's about how you treat others and stand up for what's right." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Like you do." "And like you did," I added, kissing the top of his head. That night, as Michael and I lay in bed, he traced patterns on my arm, his fingers eventually finding the new bracelet. "My mother giving you her family heirloom," he mused. "If you told me that would happen yesterday, I'd have said you were dreaming." "It took a 6-year-old to show her what really matters," I said. Michael pulled me closer. "It took you, building a life that couldn't be denied, being exactly who you are, unapologetically until she finally saw you." I thought about the journey ahead, undoubtedly with some bumps along the way as Barbara truly reconciled her old prejudices with her new understanding. But for the first time in 7 years, I felt hope that my son would grow up with a complete family circle, one where every member was valued for exactly who they were. "Some lessons take a lifetime to learn," I murmured sleepily. "And some children," Michael replied, "are the greatest teachers."